Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and in today's video we're going to have a look at the latest from the live radar, run through the weather warnings as we do have wind warnings issued for some of the impacts from Storm Otto, which is not really directly impacting the UK with most of its precipitation and strongest winds into Scandinavia and Denmark, but with some of those stronger winds affecting northern areas. So we do have yellow warnings issued for wind 60 to 80 miles per hour, and actually by the time this video is published, most of those winds will have died down, but of course we will touch on it as there still could be some impacts. There are also snow and ice warnings issued for Highlands of Scotland, as we are going to be seeing some quite cold air drifting in for a time, and that's going to allow showers to fall as snow over moderate to higher hills. We'll have a look at the UKV, have a look at the precipitation and the temperature over the next 5 days, as it's going to be fairly unsettled in the north, drier in the south, but of course that's not going to be exclusive. Things are going to be mixing around, and it will generally be milder in the south, cooler in the north. However, as we head towards that day 5 time frame, we're getting towards that period at the end of the month, we're expecting it to be quite a bit colder. We'll be able to see that colder air mass starting to drift in from the north at the end of the UKV run, and then we'll have a look at the longer range, the GFS, GM, ECMWF, and the ensembles, as it's looking really quite likely we do see at least colder weather towards the end of the month. Whether it's very cold, whether it's snowy, was yet to be determined. The one thing we can say is the wind direction most likely will be coming from a cold direction, whether it's a northerly or easterly. Most of the runs and the ensemble members at least have the -5 line coming in for a number of days. Some even have it a lot longer, and the GFS today, the 6 o'clock run, produces quite a bitty cold spell actually, with us getting the -10 ice firm in for a few days. So there is still some uncertainty with the end of the month, but it's looking highly likely from the majority of the models that we do have some form of colder weather towards the end of the month, and potentially snowier weather, depending on how cold those air masses are, and how close to the low pressure systems we do get. So do remember, if you enjoy my videos, make sure you like and subscribe, and remember to follow me on Twitter as well, the link's in the description. So do start on the live radar. You can see there are a few showers in the north at the moment, but Storm Otto now is out towards Denmark, and it was named by the Danish Met Office. And you can see big weather fronts associated with it, heavy snow through central areas of Scandinavia, elsewhere rain, and very strong gusty winds. Of course, the wind field is much larger than this, and that's why we saw warnings issued in Scotland, and they are continuing through the rest of today. We do have showers starting to push in, and it's associated with colder air dragged in from the backside of Storm Otto, and that is why we're starting to see some winteriness, and these will become more exclusively wintry over the higher ground. Elsewhere, it's generally quite dry and actually pretty mild for the time of year, continuation from the last few days, but of course cooler air masses will drift in at times, so it's not going to be mild all the time, but the majority of the time it will be average to above average. If you put on the temperatures of just before midday as I'm recording this, you can see how it is very mild in the south, in the Midlands, some real thick yellows there, indicating temperatures up towards sort of 13 to 15 degrees once again, very mild. Further northwards, cooling down considerably through Scotland. Again, really only cold over the higher ground, but to low-lying areas, the temperatures are cooling, and probably by this evening, those temperatures will be back down towards the low single digits, if not towards freezing. So, turning a lot cooler there over the course of the day. If you do go over the weather warnings now, you can see we have widespread yellow wind warnings. We've got a new wind warning issued that was issued this morning until 2 p.m. today, so by the time you're watching this will have expired, and most of these wind warnings will have expired as well. You can see this wind warning here expires at 3 p.m, and this other one here expires at 2 p.m. So by the time this video comes out, these will have been gone, but of course, need to make sure everyone knows that there still is wind impacts from this, just not quite as strong, probably more gusting around 40 or 50 miles per hour. However, we do have a snow and ice warning that is issued from 11 p.m. tonight until 9 a.m. tomorrow. Ice and snow may lead to some travel disruption across parts of Scotland on Saturday morning, mostly on high-level routes. Again, an area of rain and snow will move east during the early hours of Saturday. Snow is expected to fall on routes above 300 metres, so pretty much the highest ground. Accumulation of 2 to 5 centimetres, perhaps 5 to 10 centimetres on the highest routes, and we may see some mixing and some snow down to maybe 150 metres with some slight accumulations. Dry weather will move in after that, and of course the temperatures will drop, so there could be some icy patches on untreated surfaces. High likelihood, lower end of the impact. Again, mainly over the higher ground, so if you are low-lying areas, don't expect anything too crazy. Maybe some mixing, some falling snow, a bit of sleet only really any significant snow over the highest routes. So if you do now go over to the UKV and have a look at the precipitation and the temperature over the next 5 days, you can see Storm Otto moving just to our north earlier this morning. Most of its impact staying offshore in terms of precipitation, but of course gusty winds moving in and slowly dying away now. Over the course of this evening, you could see how there's a precipitation band moving in, another small area of low pressure, seeing some snow over the higher ground, but again, really only significant over the higher ground, low-lying areas, not seeing too much, and some moderate to significant rain for some areas in the Midlands as well, where we haven't seen too much rain over the course of the last few weeks, really. And that will eventually spread eastwards, and Saturday will actually be a pretty pleasant day. There will be some thicker cloud around and some remnants of precipitation, but again, we shouldn't expect too much associated with that. As we head into Sunday, you can see it turns a little bit brighter in places further southwards, but still some rain lingering northwards. Again, uncertainty with how far southwards that rain does come. And then as we head into Monday, more precipitation in the north, drier in the south, but still quite a cloudy picture, unfortunately. Into Tuesday, we see a big weather front starting to push through and actually clears all areas, as it does bring in very cold air, in fact. Look at that. By Wednesday early morning, quite widespread, heavy, wintry snow showers pushing in from the northwest. Again, this is from a northwesterly wind and it will veer more northerly. And the one thing we do have to remember this time of year that sometimes does get forgotten is that, yes, we're going to be seeing quite a cold air mass move in, we're going to be seeing low pressure, but of course we saw that with the cold spell in December and one in January as well, but we didn't see as much convection as expected, and as even I expected, and the reason for that is because the sun just simply isn't strong enough to conduct solar heating on the ground. We were seeing mainly convection through the colder air masses going over warmer seas. However, this time of year, as we head into March, the sun is a lot stronger, and that will allow showers to maintain their strength, if not even take off, over the ground, where we can see some solar heating. Now, the disadvantage of that, if you want heavy snowfall, is that it will mean the temperatures towards the surface are most likely slightly warmer. We're more likely to see sort of 3 or 4 degrees in the same air mass that might have produced 0 or 1 degree a month or two ago. So that's the only caveat with that. So we could see in the coming weeks quite a lot of snow, at least falling snow, but any significant snow will mainly be over higher ground in the north and will be falling overnight. So areas in the south could see snow, maybe even accumulating snow, but mainly overnight. Any daytime snow will be quite hard to come by unless it's under very heavy, thick snowfall under sort of a weather front. So we'll have to see what happens. Of course, I'm speculating, as we are still a number of days away from any winteriness arriving widely, and then of course maybe a week or two before it becomes potentially widespread. So we'll have to see, but at this stage I'm not sure we have to get that caveat in. So if we do have a look at those max temperatures over the course of the next 5 days or so, as we head to this afternoon, you can see it's actually really quite mild in the south, still 13 or 14 degrees this afternoon, much cooler further northwards, and that continues overnight, maybe freezing over the Highlands of Scotland, or 10, 11 degrees in the south, just big temperature contrasts, and that's why we see the heavier precipitation. Into Saturday afternoon, temperatures still cold in the north, low single digits. In the south, 13 or 14 degrees, very mild for the time of year, proper spring-like conditions. And then to Sunday again, more widely slightly milder, with mid-single digits in the north, 10 to 12 degrees in the south. Into Monday afternoon again, 13 or 14 degrees perhaps in the south, still cooler in the north, but again nothing too unexpected. And into Tuesday, 10 or 11 degrees. But watch what happens as we head into the early hours of Wednesday. Look at that, widespread freezing temperatures coming in from the north and the west, and that will spread quite widely into the middle of next week. Again, uncertainty exactly how it does play out, exact wind directions and exact air masses, but colder air will be moving in, so most likely most areas will be back down towards average or below average temperatures in the day, and much colder overnight with temperatures widely below freezing. Of course, we'll keep that updated as it still is a number of days away and things still can change. So if we do now have a look at the pressure charts for the longer range, go over to the GFS and see what that is producing over the course of the next couple of weeks. Now you can see the Storm Otto just moving to our northeast at the moment, a westerly flow over the coming days, and that's why it's divided between milder in the south, drier as well, and wetter and cooler in the north. However, we see this low plunging in from the north come early next week, Wednesday, Thursday time. and it produces a cold air mass. What happens exactly after this is still a little bit uncertain, but this GFS run does move that high pressure system further northwards and eastwards and starts pulling a bit of an easterly wind, quite cold easterly wind, and that continues all the way towards the end of the month. Quite a bitterly cold easterly flow coming in there. Again, no beast from the east. We need much colder air, a good 5 or 10 degrees cooler than this to get that sort of pattern, but very cold and potentially blocked pattern. And this really could be signs of the southern stratospheric warming coming in into early March. You can see huge heights rise towards Greenland and just to our north, and easterly winds in general. Again, if we do watch the air masses, you can see the -10 isotherm comes in for the UK there. Go back to the European look, -10 isotherm coming in, so quite a cold air mass, but nothing ridiculous, not -15 or -20 that we would get from the beast from the east, but very cold, enough to probably give ice days in places, and widespread snowfall. Beyond that, we do see slightly milder air masses as they do come round the high, but you can see much colder air is plunging into Europe, so most likely you can see another round of very cold temperatures there. If you do put on the temperature deviation, I do want to have a look at this. You can see how cold air is spilling out into Europe, North America, and very mild conditions up towards northeast Canada and Greenland. Again, signs perhaps of the southern stratospheric warming, because that's what you generally see. You see much milder air going into the Arctic and much colder air spilling out into the mid-latitude. So perhaps signs here that the southern stratospheric warming taking effect into early March. But of course, we will have to see what happens. I think the colder spell coming next week is mainly driven by the MJO going into phase 6, 7 and 8, allowing amplification in the jet stream with that blocking pattern featuring to our north and east. Because remember, we have had a lot of high pressure blocking this winter so far, just not always in a position to give us cold weather. We've seen a lot where it's just giving us frosty, foggy weather sat over the top of us. So the atmosphere definitely is conducive of blocking patterns, but just hasn't come off further northwards. So the MJO forced that high pressure further northwards, which looks likely next week. It could put us into quite a blocked, colder spell for a time. If we do go into the GEM now and see how that does compare, again, high pressure to the south, low pressure to the north. Eventually that northerly wind comes in and the high pressure tries to build to our north and it pulls in an easterly flow. Again, not quite as cold. You can see very mild upper air temperatures, in fact, with this. But remember, it's coming in from the near continent towards the surface. It probably would be a lot cooler. Again, look at the dew points. A lot cooler down towards the low single digits, if not towards freezing. So much cooler direction coming in from the near continent, but regardless, it's still quite a warm upper air temperatures. A very similar pattern, just slight orientation shift is drawing that air from the Mediterranean instead of Scandinavia. And that means we are much milder at the upper air temperatures. I do think it won't be all that mild at the surface, but it definitely won't be snow-worthy or anything like that. So very similar pattern from the GM. Still would probably go generally cold for a couple of days and stay cool even when this mild or warm easterly flow comes in. But I do suspect that it will be cooler at the surface, and I think it will be mainly cool towards the end of the month. Of course, we'll have to see what happens with this. Majority, though, do keep us in a colder easterly flow, as we'll see from the ensembles at the end of the video. If you look at the ECMWF, see how that does compare. Again, high pressure to the south, low pressure to the north. We see that northerly flow come in. High pressure building to our north, and the ECMWF going for a cool northeasterly flow. Again, no ridiculously cold air masses. It's not a particularly strong easterly flow, but we remain in fairly cold air masses. Nothing ridiculous, as I said, but generally cool enough to give overnight frosts and generally average to below average temperatures. But again, probably no widespread snow or anything like that. Only falling snow probably over high ground in the north. But again, it's an interesting pattern, high pressure building to our north. And of course, we need to get those pressure patterns right before we then can have a look really at those air masses. So all three runs showing something broadly similar in terms of pressure charts, but just slightly different orientations of those high pressure systems and slightly different strength of the winds. GFS, very strong wind with the cold air mass towards Scandinavia already, able to drag in very cold air. ECMWF has a very similar pattern, very similar wind direction, but just not quite as strong of an easterly flow and not as much cold air towards Scandinavia, and not quite orientation of those lows towards Scandinavia. It does mean it's not quite as cold, and the GEM just has that high pressure system slanted further southwards and eastwards, drawing up a southeasterly flow. So very similar pattern as said, but slightly different outcomes, or quite big actually outcomes in terms of upper air temperatures. We'll have to see towards the surface. If you finish by having a look at the ensembles, these are the latest GFS ensembles out to the 1st of March. They're not fully come out, but these are the latest 6 o'clock runs from the ensembles here. Actually get another day in there. You can see it is very mild for the next sort of 5 days or so, but then we see a huge drop, about 10 degrees at 850 HPA, well down below -5 line for a number of days, and it stays fairly cold for the foreseeable future, all the way to probably the end of the month. The GFS operational run is very much a colder outlier, I must say. It's getting down to the -10 level and staying there for a good 5 or 6 days. That would be incredibly cold, and low precipitation, indicating high pressure is generally in control. We do trend more towards average, and that's expected into early March. And again, we'll have to see what happens with that. But a cooler, or if not, quite cold spell from the GFS ensembles here. Look at the dew points, well below freezing for a number of days, indicating a cold air mass. And again, look at the 2-meter temperatures, down towards the mid-single digits. Again, those will be deciphered nearer the time. But down from sort of 13, 14 degrees in the next few days, down towards 5 or 6 degrees. Even though it's not anything bitterly cold, it will feel a lot colder at the surface, definitely. If you look at the ECMWF ensembles to finish, you'll see it's slightly different. It does have the big cold drop, but it only goes slightly below average. Not all ensemble members go down there. And then we return to above average before the end of the month. So ECMWF ensemble's much more pessimistic with it. Again, they've got a lot more runs. There's 50 ensemble members here, so there is going to be a lot more scatter. But the bulk of the ensemble members do go colder than average, but not by anywhere near as much as the GFS does, and don't hold on to it for as long. So we'll have to see. Both are showing a colder dip, at least next week. Briefly colder air for a few days, but whether it's a long-term colder spell or whether it turns slightly milder after that, we will have to see. Remember, some of these runs could be showing 0 degrees at 850 HPA, but still would be cold at the surface because it's coming in from the near continents. So we do have to remember that with higher pressure easterly winds, we can see quite we can see sort of average upper air temperatures, but still colder conditions towards the surface in terms of frost and fog. So we'll have to see what happens, but I do think it's pretty good confidence now. We're going to be seeing cold weather next week. How cold it will get and how long it will last, still yet to be determined, and we'll have to keep deciphering that in the videos. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Make sure you do keep it up to date, as we could be seeing, as I said, a lot colder weather coming next week and into early March. Of course, we've got the sun stratospheric warming coming through, so it could add to the volatility we're seeing at the moment. So yeah, very interesting model watching the coming days and weeks. As I said, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you again for another video soon.